The bullet whizzed past Ophelia Lancaster's ear so close she felt the heat of it, and in that moment, standing in the dusty street of Custer, South Dakota with her carpetbag clutched to her chest, she wondered if coming west at 43 years old was the stupidest decision she had ever made. The gunfight between two drunken miners ended as quickly as it started. Both men wrestled to the ground by the town marshal before anyone got killed. Ophelia pressed one trembling hand to her chest and tried to steady her breathing as townspeople emerged from doorways and continued about their business, as though violence was just another Tuesday afternoon. It was August 1878, and Custer was a town still drunk on gold fever, still wild enough to remind everyone that civilization was a thin veneer over something raw and dangerous. "You must be Miss Lancaster," a voice said behind her, and Ophelia turned to find a plump woman in a burgundy dress studying her with shrewd gray eyes. "I'm Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, the matchmaker. Your letter said you would arrive on today's stage." Ophelia smoothed her travel-worn skirts and tried to compose herself, aware that she must look a fright after 3 weeks of travel from Boston. Her dark hair, threaded liberally with silver, had escaped its pins, and dust covered her from head to toe. She knew what Mrs. Jenkins must be thinking. The advertisement had said women between 20 and 35 were preferred. Ophelia was neither young nor particularly beautiful, and the years of nursing her invalid mother had left fine lines around her eyes and mouth that no amount of cold cream could erase. "Yes, I am Ophelia Lancaster. I apologize for my appearance. The journey was rather arduous." "Mrs." Jenkins circled her slowly, lips pursed, and Ophelia felt like a horse being evaluated at auction. "The advertisement did specify younger women," the matchmaker said finally, not unkindly, but with the bluntness of someone who dealt in practical matters. "Most of the men hereabouts are looking for wives who can bear them children and work hard for many years." "I'm aware of what the advertisement said." Ophelia kept her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I can work hard, Mrs. Jenkins. I spent 20 years caring for my mother through her illness while running her boarding house. I can cook, clean, sew, keep accounts, and manage a household. I may not be young anymore, but I'm strong and capable." "It is not your capabilities I doubt, dear. It is simply a matter of what the men want." Mrs. Jenkins sighed, and there was genuine regret in her eyes. "She's not young anymore, I'm afraid. Most of my clients will not even consider." "Then perhaps I should not have come." Ophelia's voice cracked despite her best efforts. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey west, had left behind everything familiar because after her mother's death, the boarding house had been sold to pay debts, and at 43, she had found herself alone with no prospects and no future. The matchmaker's advertisement had seemed like Providence, a chance to start over, but she'd been a fool to think any man would want a woman her age when younger, prettier options were available. "Now, do not despair just yet." Mrs. Jenkins took her arm and steered her away from the main street toward a tidy office with lace curtains in the windows. "Let me look through my files. There might be someone. Though I warn you, the men who are not particular about age tend to be, shall we say, less desirable themselves." Inside the office, Mrs. Jenkins settled behind her desk and began pulling out folders, muttering to herself. Ophelia perched on the edge of a wooden chair, exhaustion settling into her bones. Through the window, she could see the black hills rising in the distance, dark and mysterious against the summer sky. This country was so different from Boston, so vast and untamed. She felt very small and very foolish. "Ah, Mrs. Jenkins said suddenly, "there is one possibility. Though I should warn you he's quite rough, lives up in the mountains, comes to town perhaps 3 times a year, traps beaver and hunts elk, from what I understand. I've been trying to find him a match for 2 years, but most women take one look at his description and refuse." "What is wrong with him?" Ophelia asked warily. "Nothing wrong precisely. He is just very much a mountain man, huge fellow, built like a bear with long hair and a beard, lives alone in a cabin miles from anywhere. He wants a wife for companionship and help with the practical matters of living, but he is honest that his life is hard and isolated. Most women want to stay in town where there are other people in shops and such." Ophelia considered this. After 20 years trapped in a boarding house tending to an increasingly bitter invalid, Isolation did not sound entirely terrible. "How old is he?" Mrs. Jenkins consulted her notes. "He said 45 when he registered with me, but that was 2 years ago. So 47 now, I suppose." "So he is not young anymore either," Ophelia said quietly. The matchmaker looked up and something shifted in her expression. "No, I suppose he is not." "What is his name?" "August Ashford. He served in the army after the war, then came west and took to the mountains. He has money saved, owns his land and cabin outright, and by all accounts is honest and hard-working. Just prefers solitude to society." "May I meet him?" Mrs. Jenkins tapped her pen against the desk. "He is not due in town for another month. However, I could send word up the mountain that a potential match has arrived. He might come down sooner if he knows someone is interested." "How would you send word?" "There's a young man who delivers supplies to some of the remote homesteads and trappers. He could take a message." Miss Jenkins studied Ophelia with new interest. "Are you certain? Life with a mountain man would be very different from what you are accustomed to." Ophelia thought of the boarding house, the endless days of chamber pots and laundry, and listening to her mother's complaints. She thought of the pitying looks from other women as she aged past marriage, past children, past any conventional future. She thought of having nothing and no one after her mother died. "I am certain I have nothing to lose by meeting him," she said. Mrs. Jenkins nodded slowly. "Very well. I have a room in my house where you can stay while we wait for his reply. It may be a week or 2. Can you pay for your board?" Ophelia calculated quickly. "I can pay for 2 weeks. After that I would need to find work." "Let us hope it does not come to that. Come, I will show you to your room and you can wash up and rest. You look exhausted, dear." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Ophelia unpacked her few belongings and tried not to cry from sheer exhaustion and uncertainty. She had been so brave in Boston, making this decision to go west, to start over. But now that she was here, the reality of her situation pressed down on her. She was too old for most men to want her, too poor to be independent, too alone to have any other options. She washed her face and changed into a clean dress, then lay down on the bed intending to rest for just a moment. She fell asleep instantly and did not wake until morning. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Mrs. Jenkins was kind enough, giving Ophelia small tasks around the house to help her feel useful and to justify reducing her board payment. Ophelia cooked, mended, and helped with the endless correspondence the matchmaker maintained with lonely men and hopeful women scattered across the frontier. She learned that Custer had been founded just 2 years earlier in 1876, after gold was discovered in the Black Hills. The town had grown quickly, thrown together with the hasty optimism of any gold rush settlement. Most of the buildings were raw lumber, unpainted and temporary looking. The streets turned to mud when it rained and choked everyone with dust when it did not. But there was an energy to the place, a sense that anything was possible. Ophelia took walks around the town, careful to stay on the main streets after her frightening introduction to frontier justice. She watched the miners and prospectors, the gamblers and merchants, all trying to carve out their fortunes. She saw other women, too, most of them younger, but some weathered and worn by the hard life. They nodded to her cautiously, and she nodded back, both recognizing in each other the particular courage it took to survive in this place. On the 14th day after her arrival, Ophelia was helping Mrs. Jenkins prepare supper when someone knocked on the door. The matchmaker wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, and Ophelia heard a man's deep voice rumble something she could not quite make out. "He is here," Mrs. Jenkins called. "Mr. Ashford has come." Ophelia's heart lurched. She touched her hair nervously, wishing she had worn her better dress, wishing she had more warning. But there was nothing to be done about it now. She smoothed her apron and walked into the parlor, trying to keep her expression calm and composed. The man standing in Mrs. Jenkins's parlor was the largest human being Ophelia had ever seen. He had to duck slightly to fit through the doorway, and his shoulders were so broad they seemed to fill half the room. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy shirt, both clean but clearly handmade. His hair was dark brown, shot through with gray, hanging past his shoulders and tied back with a leather cord. His beard was trimmed shorter than she had expected, showing a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a startling clear blue, and they assessed her with an intelligence and directness that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "Miss Lancaster," Mrs. Jenkins said nervously, clearly uncomfortable with having such a large, rough man in her tidy parlor. "This is August Ashford, Mr. Ashford, Miss Ophelia Lancaster." "Madam," August said, and his voice was like distant thunder, deep and resonant. He did not move closer, as though aware that his size might be intimidating. "Mr. Ashford," Ophelia replied, and was proud that her voice stayed steady. "It is a pleasure to meet you. Mrs. Jenkins said in her message that you were interested in meeting me, that you understood the situation, living in the mountains and such." "I do understand, yes." August shifted his weight, and Ophelia noticed he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even through his shirt, and his hands were scarred and calloused from hard work. This was a man who lived by his strength and skill, utterly unlike the soft merchants and clerks she had known in Boston. "I should be honest with you, madam," August said slowly, as though choosing his words carefully. "I'm not young anymore. I'm 47 years old, and I have lived hard. My face is not handsome, my manners are rough, and my life is not easy. I live alone in the mountains because I prefer it that way, but I find I am lonely sometimes. I want a wife for companionship and partnership, someone to share the work and the quiet evenings. But I will not lie to you and say it would be a comfortable life by civilized standards." Ophelia found herself smiling despite her nervousness. His honesty was refreshing after Mrs. Jenkins's careful politeness. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Ashford. I should be equally honest. I'm 43 years old. I'm not beautiful, and I have never been married or had children. I spent the last 20 years caring for my invalid mother, and now she is gone, and I have nothing left. I came west because I had no other options. Mrs. Jenkins told me I was too old for most men to consider, so I do not have the luxury of being particular." Something flickered in August's eyes that might have been respect. "Mrs. Jenkins told me the same thing about myself, said I was too old and too rough for most women to want." He paused, then added, "I told her neither am I, and that sounded like a perfect match to me." The words hung in the air between them, and Ophelia felt something shift in her chest. Here was a man who understood what it meant to be dismissed, to be considered past your prime, to be alone not entirely by choice. Here was someone who might understand her. "Would you like to sit down, Mr. Ashford?" she asked. "Perhaps we could talk more comfortably." Mrs. Jenkins fetched tea, though August looked uncomfortable with the delicate cup in his massive hands. They sat in the parlor, and Ophelia found herself relaxing as they talked. August asked about her life in Boston, and she told him about the boarding house, about the endless work and the grinding responsibility of caring for someone who never got better. He listened carefully, not interrupting, his blue eyes focused on her face. In turn, he told her about his cabin in the mountains, about the cycles of trapping and hunting that governed his year. He spoke about the silence of winter snow and the way elk moved through the pine trees at dawn. He had fought in the war, he said briefly, and afterward could not bear to be around crowds of people anymore. The mountains gave him peace. "It is beautiful up there," he said, and for the first time, real emotion warmed his voice. "Hard, but beautiful. The cabin is solid, got a good roof and a stone fireplace. I keep a garden in summer, and there's a creek nearby for water. It is not fancy, but it is sound." "It sounds peaceful," Ophelia said honestly. "It is, but it is also lonely." August set down his teacup carefully. "I'm not a man who needs constant talk or entertainment, but I would like someone to share meals with, to work alongside. Someone to break the silence sometimes. I can provide for a wife, keep her safe and warm and fed, but I cannot offer society or excitement." "I have had enough of society," Ophelia said, "and I have never been one for excitement." August studied her for a long moment. "Why did you really come west, Miss Lancaster? It is a hard journey for a woman alone." Ophelia considered lying, painting her decision in braver colors. But his honesty deserved the same in return. "Because I was afraid. My mother died, the boarding house was sold, and I found myself 43 years old with no money, no home, and no future. Everyone I knew pitied me. The other women at church whispered about me. Poor spinster Ophelia, left on the shelf, dried up and useless. I could not bear it anymore. So when I saw the Matchmaker's advertisement, I spent almost everything I had to come here. I thought perhaps in a place where everything is new, I could start over. But I am beginning to think I was foolish." "You were not foolish," August said, and there was surprising gentleness in his rough voice. "You were brave. It takes courage to leave everything familiar and start over. Or desperation. Sometimes courage and desperation are the same thing." He leaned forward slightly, his massive frame somehow not threatening but present, real, solid. "I'm going to be direct with you, Miss Lancaster, because I do not believe in wasting time. I think we might suit each other. We are both older, both alone, both wanting something different than what we have had. I would like you to consider marrying me." Ophelia's heart hammered against her ribs. "We only just met." "That is true. So I propose this. Come up to the cabin with me for a week. See the place, see how you like it, see if you can tolerate my company. If at the end of the week you want to leave, I will bring you back to town. No hard feelings. But if you think you could make a life there, then we will marry." "That is highly improper," Mrs. Jenkins interjected, having been listening from the doorway. "A young woman cannot stay alone with a man." "I am not a young woman," Ophelia said quietly, keeping her eyes on August, "and I'm tired of living by rules made by people who never faced the choices I have faced." August's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Is that a yes?" Ophelia thought about the small room upstairs, about the dwindling coins in her purse, about the pitying looks and the long, empty years stretching ahead, if she stayed in town hoping for a better offer that would never come. She thought about this man who was too old and too rough and too honest, who lived alone in the mountains because crowds hurt him, who understood what it meant to be lonely. "Yes," she said, "I will come with you." Mrs. Jenkins sputtered protests about propriety and reputation, but August ignored her, his attention fixed on Ophelia. "We will leave at dawn tomorrow. Bring warm clothes and practical boots. The trail is rough." That night, Ophelia lay awake in the narrow bed, wondering if she had lost her mind. She was going into the mountains with a man she barely knew, breaking every rule of decent behavior she had ever learned. But then again, those rules had never served her well. They had kept her trapped and alone, respectable and miserable. Perhaps it was time to write new rules. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky brightening from black to deep blue to gold. Ophelia dressed in her most practical clothes and packed her belongings into her carpet bag and a canvas rucksack Mrs. Jenkins reluctantly provided. When she came downstairs, August was waiting in the kitchen, his presence making the room feel small. "You came," he said, and she heard surprise in his voice. "Did you think I would not?" "I thought you might reconsider in the night. Most people think better of my offers once they have time to reflect." "I am not most people, Mr. Ashford." "No," he said, and this time he definitely smiled, a brief warming of his austere features. "I do not believe you are, and you should call me August." "Then you must call me Ophelia." He nodded and took her bags, slinging them over his massive shoulders as though they weighed nothing. Outside, 2 horses waited, both sturdy mountain-bred animals with intelligent eyes. August helped Ophelia mount, his hands gentle despite their strength, then swung onto his own horse with practiced ease. They rode out of Custer, as the town was waking, and Ophelia did not look back. The trail into the Black Hills was as rough as August had promised. It climbed steeply through stands of ponderosa pine and aspen, following a path that was barely visible in places. August led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about tricky footing. He did not talk much, but Ophelia found she did not mind the silence. After years of her mother's constant demands and complaints, quiet was a gift. The higher they climbed, the more beautiful the country became. The pine trees towered overhead, their needles carpeting the ground and filling the air with a sharp, clean scent. Streams tumbled down rocky slopes, the water crystal clear and cold as ice. Birds called from the branches, and once Ophelia saw a deer watching them from a clearing, its ears pricked forward in alert curiosity. August led them off the main trail onto an even narrower path that wound through a dense forest. The trees here were older, thicker, their trunks massive, and their canopy blocking most of the sunlight. It felt ancient and untouched, and Ophelia understood why August loved this place. There was a peace here that ran deeper than mere quiet, a sense of being far from the frantic scramble of human ambition. They stopped at midday by a creek, and August unpacked food from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried venison, and apples. They ate sitting on flat rocks while the horses drank from the stream. "How much farther?" Ophelia asked. "Another 3 hours. We will be there by mid-afternoon." August watched her carefully. "How are you managing? The ride is not easy." "I am well enough, a bit sore, but I will survive." "You ride better than I expected." "My father kept horses when I was young, before he died. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed riding." August nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "There's a town about 15 miles from the cabin, smaller than Custer. We go there for supplies sometimes, but mostly we would be on our own." "We," Ophelia repeated softly. She liked the sound of it. They continued on, and the afternoon sun slanted golden through the trees. The path grew steeper, and Ophelia's thighs burned from gripping the saddle, but she set her jaw and did not complain. August glanced back at her occasionally, and she thought she saw approval in those blue eyes. Finally, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, August led them into a clearing, and Ophelia saw the cabin. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney rising from one end. The roof was covered with split shingles, and there was a small porch across the front. Behind the cabin stood a lean to shelter for the horses and a shed for storage. A garden plot lay to one side, currently planted with late summer vegetables, and the creek August had mentioned burbled past about 50 yards away. The setting was spectacular. The cabin sat on a slight rise, with the forest rising behind it and a view across a valley to distant peaks. The evening light turned everything gold and amber, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Home," August said simply, and Ophelia heard pride in his voice. He helped her dismount, and she stood on unsteady legs while he tended to the horses. Her body ached from the long ride, but she was too interested in her surroundings to care. She walked around the clearing, noting how neat and well-maintained everything was. August might live alone, but he clearly took pride in his home. "Come inside," August called, and she followed him onto the porch. He opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim after the bright afternoon, and Ophelia paused to let her eyes adjust. The cabin was one large room, with the fireplace dominating one wall. There was a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a bed in the far corner. The bed gave her pause. One bed. Of course there would be only one bed. August lived alone. As if reading her thoughts, August said, "You will take the bed. I will sleep on the floor or outside while you are deciding." "That hardly seems fair. This is your home." "You are my guest." His tone suggested the matter was not open for discussion. Ophelia walked slowly around the space, taking in the details. Everything was handmade but well crafted. The table was smooth and level, the chairs sturdy. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and furs were stacked neatly in one corner. There were books on a shelf, which surprised her, and a violin case hanging on the wall, which surprised her even more. "You play?" she asked, gesturing to the violin. "Used to. Not much anymore." August was building up the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "I will make supper. You should rest. It was a long ride." But Ophelia found she was not ready to rest. She was too curious, too interested in this place that might become her home. "May I help?" August looked at her, then nodded. "All right. There's a pot of stew I made yesterday. It just needs heating, and I have biscuits we can warm." They worked together in the small space, and Ophelia was acutely aware of August's size and presence. He moved carefully around her, always leaving her plenty of room, never crowding or touching her. It was considerate, but she found herself wondering what it would be like if he did touch her, what those large, scarred hands would feel like. The thought made her blush, and she focused intently on setting the table. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with venison and vegetables from the garden. They ate as the light faded outside and the fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls. August was quiet during the meal, but it was a comfortable silence, not awkward. When they finished, Ophelia insisted on washing the dishes while August saw to the horses one final time. She explored the shelves while she worked, noting the supplies he kept. Everything was organized and practical. There was flour and cornmeal, salt and sugar, coffee and tea. Jars of preserves lined one shelf. He had prepared for winter, she realized, and prepared well. August returned and banked the fire for the night. "The outhouse is behind the cabin," he said. "There's a lantern by the door if you need it, and there's a bar for the door at night, though we have never had trouble with anything but curious bears." "Bears?" Ophelia asked faintly. "They usually stay away from the cabin, but it is good to be cautious." He pulled blankets from a chest and began making himself a bed near the fireplace. "You will be safe here, Ophelia. I promise you that." She believed him. Despite knowing him for barely a day, she believed he would keep her safe. That night, lying in August's bed while he slept on the floor across the room, Ophelia stared at the dark ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest. An owl called somewhere nearby. The creek murmured its endless song. And under it all, she could hear August's deep, steady breathing. She had never slept in the same room as a man before. It should have frightened her, but instead, she found it oddly comforting. She was not alone. For the first time in years, she was not alone. The next morning, Ophelia woke to find August already up and moving quietly around the cabin. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and she realized with shock that she had slept later than she had in decades. Her mother had required care from dawn onward, and the habit of early rising had been unbreakable. Until now. "Morning," August said when he saw her stirring. "There is water warming for washing. I will be outside tending the garden." He left her privacy to dress and wash, and Ophelia appreciated his thoughtfulness. When she emerged, she found him in the garden, pulling weeds from between rows of beans and squash. She stood watching him for a moment, noting the way the morning sun caught in his hair, turning the gray strands silver. His sleeves were rolled up, showing forearms thick with muscle, and he moved with the patient focus of someone who took satisfaction in the work itself. "What can I do to help?" she asked. August looked up, squinting against the sun. "You do not have to work. You are here to see if you like it." "I will not know if I like it unless I try living here properly. Put me to work, August." He considered, then gestured to the far end of the garden. "The carrots need thinning, if you are willing." Ophelia knelt in the dirt and began the tedious work of selecting which plants to remove so the others would have room to grow. Her hands remembered the feel of soil from helping in the boarding house's kitchen garden years ago, and there was something satisfying about the simple task. They worked in companionable silence for over an hour, and when they finished, August looked at the results and nodded approval. "You know your way around a garden? My mother kept one when I was young, before she got sick." "What was wrong with her, if you do not mind my asking?" Ophelia sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. The doctors never agreed on a diagnosis, some kind of wasting disease. She grew weaker and weaker over the years, until she could barely leave her bed. I think by the end, she was as much bitter as sick, angry at what her life had become. "That must have been hard for you." "It was." Ophelia surprised herself with the admission. She had never talked about this with anyone. "I loved her, but I also resented her sometimes." "Is that terrible?" "No," August said quietly. "It is human. I took care of my mother too at the end. She had been a hard woman, strict and cold. I did my duty, but I did not grieve when she died. That is worse, maybe." They looked at each other across the garden, two people who had given years of their lives to caring for difficult parents, and Ophelia felt a connection form between them, built on shared understanding. The days developed a rhythm. August taught Ophelia the routines of mountain life, showing her where he kept everything, how to manage the cabin, what to watch for. They hiked to the creek so she could see the best place to draw water and to wash clothes. He took her to a nearby clearing where wild berries grew and helped her pick them, their hands staining purple with juice. She learned which plants in the forest were edible, which were useful for medicine, which to avoid entirely. August was patient with her questions, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that seemed obvious to him. And Ophelia found herself relaxing in a way she had not since childhood. There were no schedules here, no arbitrary demands on her time. The work was hard, but it was purposeful, and at the end of each day, she felt genuinely tired rather than simply drained. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. August was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, it mattered. He told her about his time in the army, about learning to live with the memories of war. He spoke about coming to the mountains and slowly healing in the silence and solitude. He asked her about Boston, about books she had read, about what she missed from her old life. "Truthfully," Ophelia said one evening, "I do not miss much. Perhaps the library. The lending library had been my escape." "I have books," August offered, gesturing to his small collection. "Not many, but you are welcome to them." She examined the shelf. There was a worn Bible, several novels by Cooper and Irving, a book on natural history, and surprisingly, a volume of poetry by Whitman. "You read poetry?" August looked uncomfortable. "My mother insisted I learn to read well. She had ambitions for me to be educated, even though we were poor. The poetry was hers. I kept it after she died, though I'm not sure why." Ophelia pulled down the Whitman and opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed and well thumbed. "May I read some?" "If you like." She read aloud while August worked on repairing a harness, her voice soft in the firelit cabin. The words spoke of grass and democracy, of the body electric, of containing multitudes. When she finished a poem, August said quietly, "I never understood most of it, but I liked the sound of the words. I think that is understanding enough." On the fourth night, Ophelia woke to a strange sound outside the cabin. She lay very still, listening, her heart pounding. There was something large moving around outside, and she could hear heavy breathing and the scrape of claws on wood. August was awake instantly, rising from his blankets with the fluid speed of someone accustomed to danger. He moved to the window and looked out, then turned to Ophelia and put a finger to his lips for silence. They waited, barely breathing, while whatever was outside investigated the cabin. It bumped against the wall, making the whole structure shake slightly. Ophelia's hands gripped the blankets, and she understood viscerally that they were not at the top of the food chain here. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, the sounds moved away, heading toward the creek. August waited a while longer, then relaxed. "Bear," he said quietly. "Young one, curious. It will not bother us." That was terrifying. Yes, but also amazing, is it not? A wild bear, living its life right outside our door. There was wonder in his voice, and Ophelia realized that this was what he loved about the mountains, this closeness to the wild world, this reminder that humans were not the center of everything. "Yes," she said slowly. It was amazing. August started to return to his blankets, but Ophelia found herself saying, "Wait." He stopped, looking at her with those clear blue eyes. "You do not have to sleep on the floor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bed is large enough for both of us if we are careful." "Ophelia, I am not suggesting anything improper. I just feel badly that you are uncomfortable in your own home. We could put a bolster down the middle like they do in old stories." August was silent for a long moment. "Are you certain?" "I am certain that you have been nothing but kind and respectful to me, and I trust you." And she realized it was true. She did trust him. So August made a barrier of rolled blankets down the center of the bed, and they lay down on opposite sides, careful not to touch. Ophelia was intensely aware of his warmth, of the way the bed dipped slightly under his weight, but she also felt safer than she had when he was across the room. If another bear came, he would be right there. She fell asleep listening to him breathe. The next morning was slightly awkward, both of them overly polite as they dressed and went about their morning tasks. But by afternoon, the strangeness had faded, and they were back to their comfortable rhythm. August took her farther from the cabin than they had gone before, following a steep trail up the mountain to a high meadow. The wildflowers were starting to fade with approaching autumn, but enough remained to paint the grass with color. The view from up there was breathtaking, miles of forest and mountains stretching in every direction. "This is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," Ophelia said, turning slowly to take it all in. "I thought you might like it." August stood beside her, his hair whipping in the mountain wind. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think, or when I forget why I chose this life." "Do you forget?" "Sometimes. In winter, when the snow is deep and the supplies are running low and it is so cold the breath freezes in your lungs, or when I am hurt or sick and there is no one to help. Then I wonder if I made a mistake, cutting myself off from people. But you stay." "I stay." He looked at her directly. "It would be easier with two, though. Warmer, safer, less lonely." Ophelia's heart was beating very fast. "August, I need to tell you something." "All right." "I'm afraid." The words came out in a rush. I'm afraid that I am too set in my ways, too old to change. I'm afraid I will disappoint you, that I will not be strong enough for this life. I'm afraid that you will wake up one day and regret choosing me. August reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His hand was huge and warm and calloused, and it engulfed hers completely. I am afraid too, he said. I'm afraid you will decide I am too rough, too silent, too strange. I'm afraid you will miss civilization and resent being stuck up here with me. I'm afraid I will fail to make you happy. They stood holding hands in the high meadow, two middle-aged people who had been dismissed and discarded by the world, who had found each other through circumstance and desperation. I think you already make me happy, Ophelia whispered. August's face transformed, the austere lines softened, and he smiled, really smiled, and she saw what he must have looked like as a younger man before war and grief hardened him. Then stay, he said. Marry me, Ophelia. Build a life here with me. Yes, she said. Yes. He pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest. He was so solid, so warm, and she felt some frozen part of herself begin to thaw. His arms came around her carefully, as though she might break, and then tightened when she did not pull away. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the wind while the eagles circled overhead. That night, August took down the violin and played for her. He was rusty, he said, but his fingers found the strings after a few false starts, and the music that emerged was simple but heartfelt. Old tunes, folk songs, melodies that spoke of longing and hope. Ophelia watched his face while he played, seeing the concentration and the unexpected grace in his movements. When he finished, she said, "That was lovely. It has been a long time since I had anyone to play for. You can play for me whenever you like." August set the violin aside and came to sit beside her. "We should talk about practical matters. If we are truly going to marry, we need to discuss how this will work." "All right. I will take you back to town in 3 days. We can find the preacher and marry proper, if that is important to you. Then we will gather whatever supplies you need and come back up. Winter will be here in another 6 weeks or so, and we need to be ready." "What does ready mean?" "Meat dried or smoked. Enough firewood cut to last through heavy snows, the root cellar fully stocked. It is a lot of work, but with 2 of us, it is manageable." Ophelia nodded, trying to imagine a winter here. "What is it like being snowed in?" "Quiet. Beautiful. Sometimes hard. We will not be able to get to town from December through March, most likely. So we need to have everything we need before the snows come." He hesitated, then said, "It means we will be alone together for months. Just the 2 of us, every day, no escape. Are you certain you can manage that?" "Can you?" she countered. "I think so. You are easy to be around, Ophelia. You do not fill the silence with meaningless chatter, but you are not afraid of it either. I like that about you." "I like many things about you too, August." "Such as?" she considered. "You are kind, patient. You do not make me feel foolish or inadequate. You listen when I speak. You have built a good life here, one that makes sense and has meaning. And you understand what it is to have given up years of your life to something that took everything from you." August was quiet for a moment. "No one has ever listed my virtues before. I am not certain I have any." "You have more than you know." He reached for her hand again, and this time it felt natural. They sat by the fire holding hands, watching the flames dance, and Ophelia felt a contentment she had not known was possible. The next 3 days passed in a golden haze. August taught Ophelia to fish in the creek, and they caught enough trout for several meals. They hiked to a grove of nut trees and gathered what they could before the squirrels took it all. They worked side by side preparing the cabin for winter, and Ophelia learned to use an axe to split kindling, her hands blistering until they began to toughen. In the evenings, they talked about their future. August described the yearly cycle of mountain life, the rhythms of planting and harvesting, trapping and hunting. Ophelia asked 1,000 questions, and he answered them all with patient detail. They planned where to expand the garden next spring, discussed the possibility of getting a milk cow, debated the merits of chickens versus the certainty that predators would find them. They were building something together, Ophelia realized, not just a marriage but a partnership, a shared vision of how to live. On the morning of the 6th day, they prepared to ride back to Custer. Ophelia packed her few belongings, but she left some things behind, marking the cabin as partially hers already, her hairbrush on the shelf beside August's razor, her shawl hanging by the door, small declarations of intent. The ride down the mountain felt different than the ride up. Ophelia knew where she was going now, knew what she was going toward instead of what she was fleeing. August rode beside her rather than ahead, close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, and each time it happened, she felt a little thrill of awareness. They reached Custer by early afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins looked shocked to see them returning together, even more shocked when August announced they were there to arrange a wedding. "You are certain?" the matchmaker asked Ophelia privately. "You have only known him a week." "I have never been more certain of anything," Ophelia replied. The preacher was found, and 2 townsfolk were recruited as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and practical, held in the preacher's small church with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Ophelia wore her best dress, and August had trimmed his beard and hair slightly. When the preacher pronounced them married, August kissed her carefully, a brief, gentle press of lips that nonetheless made her dizzy. They spent the night at the boarding house in a room designated for married couples, and Ophelia's nervousness returned in full force. But August was patient and careful, asking permission before each touch, moving slowly until she relaxed. He was gentle despite his size, mindful of her inexperience, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that made tears slip down Ophelia's cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" August asked immediately, concern flooding his face. "No," she whispered. "No, I'm just happy. I never thought I would have this. I never thought anyone would want me." He cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her forehead. "I want you. I choose you, Ophelia Ashford." Hearing her new name made her cry harder, but this time she was smiling. They spent 2 more days in Custer gathering supplies. August introduced Ophelia to the merchants he dealt with, and she saw their surprise when he explained she was his wife. Clearly, no one had expected the mountain man to marry. They bought fabric so Ophelia could make warmer clothes, extra blankets, flour and cornmeal in large quantities, coffee and tea, sugar and salt, needles and thread. August insisted she choose a few luxuries too, and she selected a book of poetry and some peppermint candy. On their last evening in town, they had dinner at the boarding house, and Mrs. Jenkins fussed over them with an air of vindication. "I told you," she said to Ophelia, "a perfect match. Neither of you young, both practical, both knowing your own minds. Sometimes the best matches are between people who have lived enough to know what they want." They left at dawn, the horses loaded with supplies, heading back into the mountains. Ophelia did not look back at Custer this time. She was going home. The weeks before winter were a blur of hard work. Ophelia learned to preserve food in ways she never had before, smoking venison and elk that August hunted, putting up vegetables from the garden, making preserves from wild berries. August cut firewood with an intensity that spoke of long experience with mountain winters, and Ophelia helped him stack it under cover near the cabin. They fell into bed exhausted each night and woke before dawn to do it all again. But there was satisfaction in the work, in watching the supplies accumulate, in knowing they were preparing together. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Ophelia found herself falling in love. It crept up on her gradually, built on dozens of small moments, the way August always brought her coffee in the morning, remembering exactly how she liked it, the way he sometimes touched her hand in passing just to make contact, the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as though her words mattered, the way he held her at night, his large body curved protectively around hers, making her feel safe and cherished. She realized she loved him the day she found him sitting outside the cabin at dawn, playing his violin to the sunrise. The music floated across the clearing, achingly beautiful, and when he saw her watching, he did not stop. He played for her while the sky brightened from black to gold, and her heart felt so full she thought it might break. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she said, "I love you, August." He went very still. "Say that again." "I love you. I know we married for practical reasons, for companionship and partnership, but I have fallen in love with you. I wanted you to know." August set down the leather he had been working on and turned to her. His face was working with emotion, his eyes bright. "I did not think I could love anyone," he said, his voice rough. I thought the war had killed that part of me. But you brought it back, Ophelia. I love you too. I think I started loving you when you knelt in my garden that first morning and got your hands dirty without complaint." They came together in a kiss that was different from any they had shared before, deeper and more urgent, full of all the feelings they had been carefully holding back. August pulled her into his lap, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, losing herself in the taste and feel of him. Later, lying in bed with her head on his chest, Ophelia said, "I was so afraid of being too old for love. Everyone made me feel like my life was over at 40. Your life was not over," August rumbled, his hand stroking her hair. "It was just waiting to begin." The first snow came in late October, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. But it was a warning. August doubled his efforts to finish preparations, and Ophelia worked alongside him, learning to think in terms of survival rather than comfort. When the serious snows began in November, they were as ready as they could be. The cabin was tightly chinked, the firewood stacked high, the root cellar full. August showed Ophelia his traps and taught her how to check them in case anything happened to him. It was sobering to realize how quickly things could go wrong out here, how dependent they were on each other. The winter settled in deep and cold. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and some mornings August had to dig them out just to open the door. The world contracted to just the two of them and the space they could keep warm. But it was not terrible. They fell into domestic rhythms, cooking and cleaning, mending and repairing. August worked on furs while Ophelia sewed, their hands busy while they talked or sat in comfortable silence. In the evenings, August played his violin, or Ophelia read aloud from their small collection of books. Sometimes they just sat by the fire holding hands, watching the flames, content to simply be together. The isolation that might have driven Ophelia mad a year ago now felt like a gift. There was no one to judge them, no one to compare them to younger couples or point out their age. Here, they were simply August and Ophelia, two people who had found each other against all odds and were building a life together. January brought the coldest weather Ophelia had ever experienced. The temperatures plunged so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows, and they had to keep the fire going constantly. Going outside, even to the woodpile, required careful bundling and could only be done for short periods. One night, huddled close to the fire, August told her about the war. He spoke haltingly, painfully, of battles and death, of friends lost and things done that could never be undone. Ophelia listened without judgment, holding his hand, offering the simple gift of bearing witness to his pain. "I thought I would never be able to live a normal life," he said. "I tried after the war. Went back east, got a job in a factory. But I could not stand it. The noise, the crowds, the pointlessness of it all. I felt like I was slowly dying, so I came west, came to the mountains, and finally found peace. And now?" Ophelia asked softly. "Now I am not just at peace. I am happy." He looked at her, firelight dancing across his face. "You made me happy, Ophelia. You gave me something worth living for beyond just surviving." "You did the same for me," she whispered. In February, Ophelia realized she was pregnant. She was 44 years old and had long since given up any hope of bearing children, but there was no mistaking the signs. When she told August, he was stunned speechless for a full minute. "Are you certain?" he finally asked. "As certain as I can be. I should see a doctor to confirm, but that will have to wait until spring." August sat down heavily, his face cycling through a dozen emotions. "I never thought I would be a father. I am too old, too rough." "You will be a wonderful father," Ophelia said firmly. "You are patient and kind and gentle despite your size. Any child would be lucky to have you." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am afraid. So am I. But we will figure it out together." He rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her with desperate tenderness. "I will keep you both safe. I swear it." The rest of winter passed with new urgency. August began making a cradle, working on it in the evenings with meticulous care. Ophelia sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, marveling at how small they were. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about how they would manage with a baby in the cabin. When spring finally came, and the snow began to melt. They made the journey to town as soon as the trails were passable. The doctor confirmed what Ophelia already knew. She was pregnant, due in early autumn. He warned her about the risks at her age, but she refused to be frightened. She had survived too much to let fear rule her now. They returned to the cabin laden with supplies for the baby and for Ophelia's confinement. August was even more protective than usual, insisting she rest frequently, worrying over every twinge and discomfort. It was both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from working in the garden. "You are carrying my child. That makes you the most precious thing in the world to me." How could she argue with that? Summer passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Ophelia's body changed in ways that amazed her, swelling with new life. August was fascinated by her growing belly, often placing his large hands on it to feel the baby kick. His face would light up with wonder each time, and Ophelia fell in love with him all over again. As her due date approached, August insisted on fetching a midwife from the town 15 miles away. The woman, Mrs. Carpenter, was experienced and practical, and she agreed to stay with them through the birth in exchange for generous payment. She arrived in late August and set up in the cabin, teaching August what he would need to do to help. Labor came on a clear September morning, fast and hard. Ophelia was terrified, and the pain was worse than anything she had imagined. But August held her hand through it all, whispering encouragement, wiping her face with a cool cloth, being her anchor in the storm. When their son was born, squalling and red-faced and perfect, August wept openly. He cut the cord with shaking hands and then cradled the baby with such gentleness that Ophelia's heart broke and mended in the same moment. "A son," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "We have a son." They named him Thomas, after Ophelia's father. He was a healthy baby, strong-lunged and eager to nurse, and from the first moment he had August completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. Mrs. Carpenter stayed for a week, making sure both mother and baby were thriving, then returned to town with promises to check on them when she could. Ophelia and August were left alone with their new son, and they navigated the overwhelming exhaustion and joy of new parenthood together. August proved to be a devoted father. He walked Thomas for hours when the baby was fussy, singing to him in his deep rumbling voice. He changed diapers without complaint and helped with feedings, always patient, always gentle. Ophelia would wake in the night to find August holding their son by the fireplace, both of them silhouetted against the flames, and her heart would fill to bursting. The first winter with Thomas was hard. Babies required constant care, and the isolation was more difficult with sleepless nights and endless demands. But they managed, supporting each other through the exhaustion. August took on more of the physical work so Ophelia could rest when the baby slept. She managed the indoor tasks and kept them all fed and warm. They learned together, making mistakes and figuring things out, and through it all, their love for each other deepened. This was what marriage was supposed to be, Ophelia realized. Not the romantic fantasy she had read about in novels, but this daily choosing of each other, this partnership in the face of challenges, this teamwork in building a life. By the time Thomas was walking, Ophelia was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier because she knew what to expect. August was less anxious and more confident. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny thing with dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Grace, and she completed their family. The years flowed past, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to trap and hunt and live in harmony with the mountains. Grace was more contemplative, often found sitting with her mother, learning to read and sew and identify plants. August and Ophelia grew older together, their hair going gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard living. But they remained devoted to each other, still finding time for quiet moments together after the children were asleep, still holding hands by the fireplace, still looking at each other with love. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Grace was 5, they all sat around the table after supper, and Thomas asked, "How did you and Mom meet, Pa?" August glanced at Ophelia, and they shared a smile full of memories. "Well," August said slowly, "it was like this. Your Ma came out west to start over, and she went to a matchmaker in Custer. The matchmaker told her she was too old for most men to want her." "That's not very nice," Grace said indignantly. No, it was not, Ophelia agreed, but it was true. I was 43 years old, and most men wanted younger wives. But then the matchmaker told Pa about Ma, August continued, and when she said your Ma was too old, I said neither am I, and that sounded like a perfect match to me. And was it? Thomas asked. A perfect match? August reached across the table and took Ophelia's hand, and she squeezed back, feeling the familiar strength and warmth of his touch. Yes, he said simply. It was perfect. Grace climbed into her mother's lap, and Thomas leaned against his father's shoulder, and they sat together as the fire crackled and the mountain night settled around their cabin. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But inside, there was warmth and love and the certainty of belonging. Ophelia looked around at her family, at the life she had built in this wild, beautiful place, and felt profound gratitude. She had thought her life was over when she left Boston, had believed she was too old for love, too late for happiness. But she had been wrong. Her life had not been ending. It had been waiting for the right moment to truly begin. Years continued to pass in the mountains, each season bringing its own rhythms and challenges. Thomas grew into a young man with his father's size and strength, though his temperament was gentler, more given to laughter. Grace became a young woman of quiet intelligence, with her mother's practicality and her father's deep connection to the wilderness. When Thomas was 18 and Grace 16, August and Ophelia sat them down one evening and asked about their futures. "You do not have to stay here," August said, though Ophelia could hear the hope in his voice that they would. "You are both old enough now to make your own choices. If you want to go to town, get an education, see more of the world, your Ma and I will support you." Thomas and Grace exchanged glances. "Pa," Thomas said slowly, "where would we go that is better than here? You taught me everything about living in these mountains. This is home." "And I love it here," Grace added. "Though I would like to go to town sometimes, maybe learn more from books, but I do not want to leave permanently." Ophelia felt tears prick her eyes. Her children had grown up wild and free, but also loved and secure. They knew their own minds and were not afraid to speak them. "Then we will make arrangements for you to visit town more often," August decided. "Thomas, you are old enough to make the journey alone now. You can escort your sister, stay a week or two, and return when you are ready." It was a new chapter for their family, one that allowed the children independence while keeping the bonds strong. Thomas began making regular trips to town, eventually finding work guiding hunters into the mountains. Grace spent time with the school teacher, learning advanced mathematics and literature, but she always returned to the cabin with relief. One autumn evening, when Thomas was 22 and Grace 20, they sat around the table, and Thomas cleared his throat nervously. "Pa, Ma, I need to tell you something." August and Ophelia exchanged worried glances. "What is it, son?" August asked. "I have been courting a girl in town, Sarah Mitchell, the blacksmith's daughter. I want to marry her, if you approve." The relief on August's face was almost comical. "Of course we approve. When do we get to meet her?" "I invited her to come up next week, if that is all right. I wanted her to see the cabin, to understand what life would be like up here." "Does she know what she's getting into?" Ophelia asked gently. "Mountain life is not for everyone." "I have been honest with her, Ma. She says she wants to try." Thomas looked anxious. "I know it is a lot to ask, bringing a wife to live with us all in one cabin." "We will build you your own cabin," August said immediately. "There's plenty of time before winter. We can put it on the far side of the clearing, give you privacy, but keep you close." And so the family grew again. Sarah was a sweet-faced girl with practical hands and a ready smile. She took to mountain life better than anyone expected, and within a year, she and Thomas had a son of their own. August and Ophelia became grandparents, and the circle continued. Grace eventually married a young man from town who had come to learn trapping from Thomas. They built their own cabin on the other side of the creek, and soon there were more grandchildren running through the clearings, their laughter echoing off the mountains. The cabins became a small community, 3 families living in harmony with each other in the wilderness. They helped each other through hard times, celebrated together in good times, and created a life that was rich despite its simplicity. August and Ophelia grew old together in the cabin they had shared for so many years. His hair went white, his back bent slightly from decades of hard work. She developed arthritis in her hands, and her vision dimmed. But they remained devoted to each other, still finding joy in simple moments, still grateful for the life they had built. On a summer evening when August was 73 and Ophelia 69, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Thomas and Sarah's grandchildren played in the clearing while Grace hung laundry near her cabin. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and a cool breeze promised relief from the day's heat. "Do you ever regret it?" August asked suddenly. "Coming here, marrying me, choosing this hard life?" Ophelia looked at him in surprise. His face was weathered and lined, his hands gnarled with age, but his blue eyes were still clear and bright. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This has been the best part of my life, August. Every day with you has been a gift." He reached for her hand, and she took it, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I was so afraid you would leave," he admitted. "That first week, I kept thinking you would wake up and realize you had made a terrible mistake." "I did realize something," Ophelia said. "I realized that I had spent 43 years waiting for my life to start, and it finally had. You gave me that, August. You saw me when everyone else looked past me. You wanted me when I thought I was unwanted." "You saved me too," he said roughly. "I was slowly turning into stone up here, forgetting what it meant to be human. You reminded me. You brought me back to life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Their children and grandchildren moved about the clearings, the sounds of family life creating a gentle soundtrack. This was what Ophelia had never dared to dream of, this abundance of love and life. "We should go inside soon," August said as the light began to fade. "It gets cold fast after sunset." "In a minute," Ophelia said. "I want to watch a little longer." So they stayed, holding hands on the porch, two people who had been written off as too old, too late, too past their prime. Two people who had found each other anyway and built something beautiful. When the stars began to emerge overhead, August helped Ophelia to her feet, and they went inside together. The cabin was warm from the fire, and supper was waiting. They ate together at the same table where they had shared thousands of meals, talking about small things, planning for tomorrow. After supper, August took down his violin, and Ophelia sat in a rocking chair with her mending. He played the old songs they both loved, and she hummed along, her hands moving in familiar patterns. Through the window they could see lights in the other cabins, their family settling in for the night. When they finally went to bed, August held Ophelia close, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. It was how they had slept for nearly 30 years, and it felt as right now as it had that first awkward night when they had built a bolster wall between them. "I love you," August murmured into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. They drifted off to sleep together, and if either of them dreamed, it was of mountains and music, of children's laughter and the endless turning of seasons, of a life well lived and love that had lasted. August lived to be 78, and when he died, it was peacefully in his sleep with Ophelia beside him. She mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more years together than either had expected, and they had filled those years with love. Ophelia lived 3 more years, spending her final days surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. She sat on the porch of the cabin and told stories about August, about their unlikely beginning, about building a life in the wilderness. She wanted them all to know that it was never too late, that age was just a number, that love could find you even when you thought you were past being found. When Ophelia died at 72, they buried her beside August on the hill overlooking the valley. Thomas carved headstones from mountain granite, and the whole family gathered to say goodbye. But their story did not end there. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in the mountains, passing down the lessons August and Ophelia had taught them. The original cabin became a gathering place, kept exactly as it had been, a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the mountains gold, the family swore they could hear the distant sound of a violin playing old folk songs, and they would smile and remember the mountain man and the woman who had been told she was too old, who had found each other anyway and proved that love knows no age, no season, no limit. They had been a perfect match after all.